Hey everyone, today I'm taking a look at Get On Board, New York and London. This is a 2 to 5 player flip and write style board game designed by Sashi. This one takes around 30 minutes to play on average. So Get On Board is actually a re-implementation of a game called Let's Make a Bus Route, which is kind of a cult favourite Japanese style game. But it's nice to see that it's made it over here to Europe and a wider market. But let's take a look at how the game actually works and how it looks. So depending on the player count, you're going to choose one of these boards. So this is the board that you're going to use for 2 to 3 players. But the reverse side of this board has a larger map where if you want to play with that 4 or 5 player count. So essentially you've got this big grid here made of, which is supposed to represent all these different streets, and you can see at all these junctions you have all these different icons, such as these different pedestrians, these businessmen, you've got these tourists and these students. You also have some landmarks, and you also have some other buildings as well, such as these skyscrapers, schools, and even more than that. So each player is also going to get given a personal player sheet that looks like this. So I've used an old one here just to show you how the scoring works, but this isn't going to represent what's actually on the board itself, but just to show you an example. So these are all actually pretty simple in the different kind of scoring criteria. So you've got the grannies here, which are simply going to offer you points the more you visit them. So you see they start off at offering 1 point, and then they start eventually getting 3 points each. You've got these students, which are going to multiply by the amount of schools that you visit throughout the game. So you can see here I visited 3 students and 2 schools, so 3 times 2 is 6 points. The businessmen and the tourists work in a very similar fashion, where every single tourist you visit, you're going to tick off the furthest to the left and the furthest highest until you visit one of the landmarks. You've got this kind of arch landmark here and this kind of lighthouse landmark. And depending on how many people you have on your bus at that time, you are going to get a corresponding amount of points. So you can see here I had 2 people on my bus when I visited a landmark, therefore I would get 5 points and write 5 in my first stop there. And that also applied to the second one. Again, the businessmen work in exactly the same way, but that's for every kind of skyscraper you visit. But additionally, when you do visit one of those skyscrapers and you have a businessman on board, then you are going to get not only the number of points, but also another pedestrian. So you've got like the granny there, another tourist, or one of these students, but that student actually has its own row at the bottom here, where you can only unlock them through doing the businessman action. You've also got a number of public objectives, which are going to be available to all the players. So you can see here that there's a public objective to pick up 5 tourists or visit 3 of these arches. And the first person to do that, or people to do that on a specific round, will get 10 points. But everybody else still has an opportunity to do it afterwards, but only gets 6 points for doing so. And finally, you're going to have a private objective where you have this kind of long string of strategy where you're trying to visit these 3 particular locations on the board. So if I visit O, H and C on the corresponding board here, then I'm going to get 10 points at the end of the game if I do so. Now there's also ways to get negative points, such as ticking off these traffic tokens. And if you do that, the more you get, the more negative points you're going to accrue throughout the game, which will come off your final score. And you've also got this kind of mitigation tool here, which can give you negative points. So that's how the scoring works. Let's talk about how the game actually operates. So each player is going to have a choice of 2 cards of where to start with your kind of traffic light here, which is going to be your starting point where you're going to start building your bus route from. And from then on, each round, you are simply going to draw one of these 12 cards off the top of the deck here, which is going to give you a number. As you can see here, this is the 2 bus ticket. You're then going to have a look on your private sheet here, or your personal sheet, and have a look where the 2 is. You can see here the 2 means I have to put down one of these kind of right angle, these 90-degree tracks on the board, and that corresponds to the 6 or the 8 as well. The 3 and the 9 are going to be a straight line or a right angle. The 4 or the 10 are going to be just one single pathway, or the 5 and 11 are going to be 3 in a straight row, and so on. And these do vary from sheet to sheet. So you can see here that for this player, the 1 and the 7 are going to be 2 straight lines, but the 1 and the 7 for this player are going to be 2 straight lines or a right angle. So again, these do vary somewhat depending on which sheet you have. So again, once you've drawn that ticket in player order, starting for the player with this token, you are going to put a number of these tokens onto the board, representing the shape that you've just drawn. So again, the 2, I've got this right angle, and then I'm going to start from a traffic light and I'm going to start putting these on these corresponding roads. So bearing in mind all the different things I'm trying to achieve, maybe perhaps I would go like this. So I could start here like this, and let's do a right angle like so. Now basically, because I visited one of these students at this junction and then a tourist, I'm going to tick off those 2 from my personal sheet, and then it'll go to the next player where they'll take the corresponding action and see what they want to do with their turn. You can also see scattered throughout the board there are these different landmarks like Wall Street and Times Square and Guggenheim, and even Columbia up here. They score slightly differently and can offer you, more points if you do things accordingly, where basically you'll get points equal to the amount of that particular pedestrian type on your bus at that time. So let's just say I had let's say I had 4 businessmen on my bus when I visited Wall Street. That means I would put 4 in this little box here for my final scoring tally. If you ever end your turn touching one of these traffic lights, then you get to put another piece of track down just to give you more kind of mileage out of each of your turns to help you cover the board a lot quicker and maybe get a lot more things done. So let's say again I ended my traffic light with the traffic light here, then I get to put another one down and potentially tick something else off my player sheet. Now, despite being quite a simple concept of just flipping a card over and putting those pieces on the board, there are some restrictions you need to be cautious of. Number 1 is traffic, which I mentioned earlier, which can start giving you negative points. And that happens if you ever share a road with another player. So it's always good to expand into unexplored areas of the map to prevent you accruing those negative points. But also on the 2 or 3 player board, all these dark areas here are always considered to be traffic. So you want to try and avoid those if you have to, or basically weigh up the net gain. Are you going to gain more points by getting that traffic, and can you afford to do so? You can also never return to the same junction you've already been to. So let's just say the yellow player wants to go forward here. They would automatically be eliminated from the game because they've already visited Wall Street there. So they'd have to divert off somewhere else, perhaps going this way. Additionally, you'll sometimes find yourself backed into a bit of a corner where you cannot actually place one of the tracks because again you might go off the board or something. So let's just say eventually maybe you were here and you had to do 3 in a straight line and you couldn't go off the board anymore. Then you could use this little tick box here in order to change a straight line into a right angle or a right angle into a straight line. But again, the more you do that, the more negative points you can start building up. And that is essentially how the game plays out. You're going to play through every single ticket, all 12 of them. And once you've done all of that, you're going to tally up who's got the most points, and whoever has got the most points will be the winner. Okay, so let's get some thoughts on Get On Board. So I really like how simple this game is. Simply just flip that card over and in turn order start placing your little wooden strips onto the board, building that route. But I love the variety of different ways the game can score. Because yes, you have a bunch of different things here. Are you going to focus on the grannies and get straight up points that way? The tourists and the businessmen, you can build up a lot of points, but doing so at the right time is important because you don't want to start visiting all the different landmarks and all the skyscrapers before you actually collect the pedestrians in the first place. So getting things in the right order is important, which really ties or blends the whole route building thing and the scoring together in a very nice way. Additionally, you've got that pressure of trying to get the public objectives done first, just to get that extra few points by beating your opponents to the punch. And again, you've got that constant backbone or that constant long-term strategy of trying to hit the 3 points on your main objective cards. But despite there being quite a big different way of scoring points, you do not actually have to follow any of them. You can do what you want, and just because you have this card here, it doesn't mean you have to focus on it. You can do what you want, and maybe you want to go on a school route and just focus on getting those huge multipliers rather than focusing on much else. But all the while you are trying to abide by those restrictions. You can only move what you are drawing in terms of the cards and the corresponding tracks you're laying at that time. But you do have some flexibility around that. Are you going to start using these to divert off path? Again, what is going to be that net gain on doing or selecting what you're going to do for that turn? I also like the added layer of interaction here because, it's not a terribly interactive game, but for a flip and write, roll and write style games, they're generally considered multiplayer solitaire games. This one, you have a physical board where other people are laying on the same track, which I think is probably one of the kind of unique things about this game is that you do have a shared actual, surface to play on. And at first you might think, it's not such a big factor because, you can afford to take a traffic here and there. But if you start stepping on each other's toes really often, or really focusing on this middle part of the board, you can really start racking up some negative points if you completely neglect that side of the game, which can come back and hurt you quite significantly. I think there's enough variety in the game to be interesting, but not too much to be overwhelming. It's not an intimidating sheet like a lot of these roll and write games are nowadays, as they're adding more and more rules into them just to differentiate themselves from the pack. This one manages to maintain a simplicity to it, but again, still having some pretty interesting ideas in the way that some of these things actually work. Particularly the businessmen and the tourists. I love that concept of trying to load up your bus as much as you can before you hit those specific spots to get these bigger scores. And even get these little bonuses of getting the additional passengers there. Just a nice little ways of scoring that, again, are very straightforward, but are just not, they're not silly and they're not too straightforward or boring. And I think that's quite a good balance that they struck here. I think the pacing for this game is fantastic. 12 turns is really not much at all. And before you know it, you're halfway through the game and you've barely achieved anything. So you do have to make sure you're getting the most out of every single route that you're building. And I love the way that the pacing is weighed up against the actual end game objective, or your personal objective, because you have very little wiggle room to do other things if you want to focus on this one. Yeah, you have a little bit, and you can get even more out of it if you manage to line up your moves perfectly by landing on these little traffic lights to get that extra boost. But again, if you want to focus on this one, you need to have that constant tension in the back of your mind thinking, yes, I can deviate here to visit this school that I need to get those points, but I still need to maintain that end game goal of hitting all those points, or again, I'm missing out on all 10 of them. But as again said earlier, you can completely neglect that if you want to and just focus on other things to get those bigger points. And that also ties into wasted moves, because sometimes, and I've been fallen short of this many times, is you end up visiting a bunch of tourists or these businessmen, and then you don't actually end up visiting the the spots they want to go and see in the end game. So you end up collecting all these different things and actually not scoring for them at all, which again will cost you quite significantly because you played so inefficiently. But yeah, all little things here that you need to try and improve and play as well as you can. But again, it's not as easy as it looks because you are so limited by the track that you're laying. You can get this game comfortably played in around half an hour, which I think is pretty damn excellent. There's a lot going on here, but not too much, and it feels like a really cool, nice, breezy filler game, but with some bite to it. And the fact that it scales extremely well from 2 to 5 players is excellent, because you can play on either side of the map, and they are very well tailored to each player count. Even in a 2-player game where you might think it's quite open, they have made that effort of making the traffic here. And a 3-player game is going to be even tighter again, because you're just gonna you got to cross each other's paths one way or another throughout the game. And even on the reverse side of the board, which I will show you shortly, yes, it's much bigger, but when you start getting 4 or 5 people crossing each other's paths, then no doubt you are going to start bumping into each other and start building up traffic again. I think the game looks absolutely lovely. It has this real charming, stripped back, minimalist, cartoony look, which actually gels with the mechanisms of the game very accurately. So I think they've made a good decision on how the way the game looks. The actual physical production is also of a high standard. The board itself is of a high quality, as I mentioned, double-sided. And all these little wooden sticks are nice. Yeah, they get a little bit fiddly sometimes if you have quite a convoluted area on the map, and you can knock them, but it's not going to take too long to fix and straighten things up. The card stock itself is generally good. Yeah, these smaller cards, but I've got no issue with that. And you can see here they've even got little punch outs just to add some more thematic sense. The sheets themselves, as I mentioned earlier, very clearly laid out, and I think they've done a good job there to stop it being overwhelming. And all the sheets also have a different array of these different line outs here of when you draw certain tickets, they're going to give you a different thing to lay out. I'm not sure how many variations they are, but it is good that you went for that extra step to stop people doing the same thing every single time. Okay, so final thoughts for Get On Board. So I am extremely happy with this game. I do tend to like my roll and write or flip and write style games to be on the lighter end of the scale. And this one certainly is that, but it's still not brain dead. You're not going through the motions and just doing things for the sake of it. You do have some interesting decisions to make here and different things to try. You've got so many different ways to score. And I love the mesh of, quick gains. Am I going to just divert here, grab this passenger to fill up my bus just before I visit this spot next to get these, or to get even more points? Bearing in mind, I want to get my objective done. I want to be the first to get these public objectives done. So you've got plenty to consider here, but still boiled down into an ultra simple game concept. Just flip a ticket over and add more to your track. But the extra wrinkles of the player interaction, again, trying to stay out of each other's way to stop building up traffic, knowing when and to pull the trigger on these different mitigation tools, and leaving yourself flexible options, because if you keep using these tools here by going down very specific routes which doesn't give you much wiggle room and doesn't give you options if you don't get the actual route that you planned on, knowing when to use them is the actual is a big factor in the game, which I do tend to enjoy. So again, I love that idea of having a plan but being willing to divert from that plan to stop you getting negative points and to get points in other ways. Very simple scoring mechanisms, but I do like the way they all work. Very accessible, but again still going to be appealing to even more saltier or seasoned gamers. So yeah, I think this game is an absolute joy to play. I've played this with quite a few different people now. Every single person has enjoyed it. Easy to teach, ultra fast. Honestly, this ticks all the boxes for me for what I want from a roll or flip and write style game, and I think it's absolutely charming, it's delightful, and I think a hell of a lot of people can enjoy this one, and they should do, and they will do, because it is that good. So I definitely recommend you checking out Get On Board, New York and London. It'll be interesting to see if they are going to bring out any sequels with different maps. But yeah, I think it's a lovely game, and I will definitely give this one my shield of quality, because I think it more than deserves that. I'm very much enjoying this one at this time. That is Get On Board, New York and London.